The weak boy. In a quiet village surrounded by high mountains, there lived a boy named Kale. He was thin, small, and weaker than everyone around him. While other children carried heavy stones for training, Kale struggled to lift even a small rock. The older men of the village were tall and broad, their arms like tree trunks, their voices strong. When Kale walked past them, they often laughed, calling him useless, calling him fragile. Kale did not argue. He kept his eyes low and said nothing. But inside his chest, he carried a silent storm, a feeling he could not explain. Sometimes, when he touched the ground, he felt the earth whisper, almost like it wanted to speak with him. Other times, when he closed his eyes at night, he saw strange dreams. Dreams of fire, of light, of a power hidden deep inside. Still, the world saw him only as weak. When the children gathered in the open ground to train with wooden swords, Kale was always the last to be chosen. When the villagers carried food or firewood, Kale was always pushed aside. And when the elders spoke of strength and honor, Kale's name was never mentioned. The boy learned to live in silence, carrying his pain like a shadow. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, the children played a cruel game. They dared Kale to lift a heavy stone, one that even some older boys could not move. "If you cannot lift it, you must bow before us like a servant," they said, their eyes sharp with mockery. Kale tried, his small hands gripping the cold rock, his arms trembling with effort. The stone did not move, not even an inch. The laughter of the children echoed across the village like a cruel song. "You are not one of us," a boy shouted. "You will always be weak," another added. Kale stood there, his cheeks burning, his chest tight with shame. He wanted to shout, he wanted to fight back, but his voice felt trapped inside. So he turned away, walking slowly, while their laughter followed him into the shadows. That night, Kale sat alone on the edge of the forest. The air was cool, the stars bright above the trees. He stared at his hands, small and fragile, and wondered why fate had made him this way. Was he truly cursed, destined to be nothing more than a shadow among giants? His heart ached, but his eyes refused to shed tears. For in his silence, Kale carried something deeper than sadness, a question, a hunger, a hidden fire waiting to be released. As the wind rustled the leaves, Kale closed his eyes. And then he heard it, a whisper, faint yet clear. "Kale," the voice called, soft as the night air. He opened his eyes quickly, looking around, but no one was there. The forest was empty, the village far behind him. Yet the voice lingered, echoing in his mind. It was not the cruel voice of the children, nor the deep tone of the elders. It was something else, something older, something powerful. "Do not fear your weakness," the voice said. "Your strength is not yet born, but waits for you, deep within the earth, deep within the fire of your soul." Kale's breath caught in his throat, his heart pounding. Was it only a dream, or was the forest truly speaking to him? The ground beneath his feet felt alive, like it pulsed with hidden energy. He touched the soil, and for a moment, a spark of warmth traveled through his fingers. It was gone in an instant, but it left him trembling. He felt both afraid and curious. Far away, in the village, the children still laughed and played. The elders still spoke of strength and honor. No one knew of the voice that had reached Kale. No one saw the spark that had touched him. To them, he was still weak, still a boy with no place in the world of warriors. But Kale knew something had changed. A path had opened before him, though it was dark and uncertain. The whisper in the night had planted a seed inside his soul, and deep in the shadows of the forest, unseen eyes watched him. Something ancient moved in the darkness, drawn by the spark inside the boy. The wind carried a distant growl, low and heavy, as if a great beast had stirred. Kale felt it before he heard it, a chill crawling up his spine. He stood, his heart racing, his body trembling. Yet he did not run, not this time. Instead, he turned his eyes toward the black forest and whispered to himself, "I will not be weak forever." The night grew colder, the air heavy with silence. The boy who had been mocked, the boy who had been broken, stood at the edge of something greater than himself. And though he did not yet know it, this was only the beginning of a story that would shake the entire world. The strange discovery. The next morning, Cale woke with the whisper still echoing in his mind. It had not been a dream. He was certain of that. The voice had felt real, too sharp, too alive to be just imagination. He could almost hear it again, like a faint echo in his chest, calling him toward the forest. The village was already busy, men carrying wood, women preparing food, children laughing in the dust. When Cale walked past, the usual stares followed him, the quiet, mocking smiles, the whispers behind his back. He ignored them this time, his eyes fixed on the dark line of trees beyond the fields. Something inside him told him to go, to step where others feared. By noon, Cale slipped away, his feet light and silent as he entered the forest. The air grew cooler under the trees, shadows shifting across the ground. Every sound seemed louder, the crunch of leaves, the call of crows, the far-off creak of old branches. Still, he walked deeper, guided not by sight, but by the strange pull in his chest. Hours passed before he found it. A clearing hidden by vines and tall grass. The ground uneven as if something long buried slept beneath. At the center stood a broken structure, half swallowed by roots and moss. It was not like the stone houses of his village. No, it was older, rougher, carved with symbols that glowed faintly in the shade. Cale's breath caught. The air here was heavy, thick with silence, as if even the birds dared not sing. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out without thought, drawn to the glowing marks on the stone. The moment his fingers touched the surface, warmth shot through him, sharp and sudden. His knees buckled, his body shaking, but along with the pain came a rush, a surge of life like fire and water flowing together inside him. His eyes widened, colors shifting before them. The trees seemed brighter, the air alive with light, the ground beneath him pulsing like a living heart. For the first time, Cale felt strength move through his arms, not enough to lift mountains, but enough to feel powerful, enough to believe. A small laugh escaped him, broken and trembling, but real. Could this be the strength the voice promised? The symbols flared brighter, and the ground trembled softly. From deep below, Cale heard something stir, a sound like stone grinding against stone. The vines shivered, the roots twisted, the clearing seemed to breathe. And then he heard again, that voice clearer now. Your weakness is only a veil, Cale. Beneath it lies the fire of those who came before you. Cale's heart pounded, his hands clutching the stone tighter. The warmth grew hotter, almost burning, yet he refused to let go. His mind filled with flashes, shadows of warriors standing tall, creatures of flame, rivers of stars bending to their will. He gasped, falling to his knees, but the visions poured into him like water into an empty vessel. Suddenly, the warmth vanished. The glow faded, the stone cold once more. Cale staggered back, his breath uneven, his body shaking. His arms felt heavier now, but not weak. No, they felt alive, humming with quiet energy. The world no longer seemed as distant, as unreachable. He touched his chest, and for the first time in his life, he felt more than a boy. He felt chosen. But the forest had changed. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was tense, watching, waiting. Cale turned his head, his skin prickling. From the edge of the clearing came a sound, low and heavy. A growl, deep as thunder, rolling through the trees. The branches shook, birds scattered, and the ground vibrated under unseen steps. Cale froze, his breath shallow. The growl came again, closer now, shaking the very air. And then he saw them, two glowing eyes in the shadows, burning like fire, fixed on him. The beast had awakened, drawn by the same energy that now flowed in Cale's veins. The villagers had always feared the stories of wild monsters that lived beyond the mountains. Creatures too strong for hunters, too wild for cages. No one had seen one in years, but the old tales warned of their power. And now, one of them was here, in front of him. Kale's heart screamed at him to run, but his legs would not move. Something stronger held him in place. Not fear, but defiance. He remembered the laughter of the children, the scorn of the men, the voice that had called him chosen. If he turned his back now, he would remain weak forever. If he stood, perhaps he would finally learn the truth of the strength inside him. The beast stepped into the clearing, its body massive, covered in dark fur, its teeth sharp and glistening. Its roar shook the trees, sending leaves raining down like falling ash. Kale's body trembled, but his fists clenched. He could feel the hum of energy in his veins, faint but real. And though terror filled his chest, another feeling rose higher. Hope. The boy who had been mocked now faced a monster no warrior dared challenge. The forest held its breath. The stones pulsed faintly behind him. And Kale whispered to himself, "I will not run. Not this time." The beast lowered its head, muscles coiling, ready to strike. Kale's heartbeat thundered in his ears, his hands glowing faintly with the last trace of the stone's light. The air split with the roar of the beast, and the clearing exploded with motion. The clearing was no longer quiet. The air shook with the sound of a deep growl rolling from the shadows. Kale stood frozen, his body trembling, yet his feet refused to step back. The glow from the strange stone had faded, but its warmth still lingered in his veins. And it was that faint fire which kept him standing as the monster emerged from the forest. First came the eyes, two burning orbs of gold, cutting through the darkness like fire. Then the outline of its massive head, covered in black fur, horns curling like jagged blades. The beast's shoulders were wider than two men, its body rippling with muscle, its claws carving lines into the soil with every step. When it exhaled, the air itself seemed to shiver, a hot mist escaping from its nostrils. It was not just an animal. It was a living storm. Kale's heart pounded in his chest, his breath shallow. The villagers' warnings echoed in his mind. Tales of beasts that crushed hunters, stories of monsters that destroyed whole camps in a single night. And yet, here it was, standing before him, its shadow swallowing the clearing. The old men would have run. The warriors would have gathered spears. But Kale had nothing, no weapon, no shield, only the strange spark that still burned inside him. The beast's roar shattered the silence. Birds scattered, the trees shook, and Kale felt the sound hammer against his chest like thunder. His ears rang, his knees bent, but he did not fall. Instead, he lifted his head, his eyes locking with the golden blaze of the monster's gaze. For the first time, he did not feel small. He felt seen, as if the beast itself recognized the fire hidden in him. But recognition did not mean mercy. With a sudden burst, the creature lunged forward, its claws ripping through the earth. Kale barely leapt aside, the ground where he had stood exploding in dirt and stone. The force of the strike sent him tumbling, his arms burning as he struggled back to his feet. The beast turned, faster than something so large should ever move. Its teeth snapped shut with a sound like breaking wood. Kale's breath caught. He had no chance against such power, and yet something inside whispered, "Stand." He clenched his fists, feeling the faint hum beneath his skin. It was weak, flickering like a dying flame, but it was there. He remembered the voice, "Do not fear your weakness." His weakness, that was what they all mocked, but what if it was not weakness at all? What if it was only the shell hiding something greater? The beast lowered its head and charged again. Kale's body screamed to run, but he planted his feet. The ground seemed to pulse beneath him, faint lines of light sparking through the soil as if answering his will. At the last second, when the beast's claw came down, Kale raised his arms. And to his shock, the strike did not crush him. The blow shook the clearing, yes, but Kale stood his ground, the claws pressing against his forearms. His bones ached, his muscles burned, yet he did not break. The beast growled, confused, its eyes narrowing. Kale's arms trembled, but the strange energy flared brighter, weaving through his veins. The villagers' laughter returned his mind. Every insult, every shove, every cruel smile. And suddenly, that pain turned to fuel. He pushed back. Not much, but enough to make the beast stumble half a step. For a heartbeat, silence returned. Kale's chest rose and fell, sweat dripping down his face. The beast snarled, circling him now, not charging blindly but watching. It had expected prey, but it had found something else. Something small, yes, but something unbroken. Kale's legs wobbled, his arms heavy, but he lifted his chin. He whispered to himself, "I will not be weak forever." The forest seemed to hear him, the stone behind him faintly glowing again as if in answer. The beast roared once more, the sound shaking the trees. But Kale no longer heard fear in it. He heard challenge, recognition, even respect. Still, the battle was far from over. The monster lowered itself, muscles tensing, ready to strike again. Kale braced, his body screaming in pain, yet alive with a new strength. The villagers who had mocked him would never believe this. The weak boy standing alone against a beast born of nightmares. But Kale knew this moment was only the beginning. He drew in a sharp breath, the glow inside him sparking brighter than before. And as the beast leapt toward him once more, Kale shouted with all the fire in his soul. Not in fear, but in defiance and promise. The clearing exploded with sound and light, boy and beast colliding as destiny took its first breath. The village square was alive with voices. The battle cries of the hunters echoed across the fields as they rushed to see the source of the monstrous roars. Mothers pulled their children into huts, doors slammed shut, windows shuttered tight. Yet still, curious eyes peered through cracks, searching for the sound that shook the earth. And there, at the edge of the forest, they saw him, Kale. The weak boy, the one they had mocked since childhood. He stood with torn clothes and bloodied arms, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with something none of them had ever seen before. And before him towered the beast, its golden eyes blazing, its claws still wet from tearing the earth. The villagers gasped. Some laughed in disbelief, whispering that Kale must be moments from death. "Look, the weakling has found trouble again," a man muttered, shaking his head. "He will be crushed before he can even scream," another said. Children hid their smiles behind their hands, certain that Kale's shame was about to end in tragedy. But then the impossible happened. The beast struck, its claws sweeping down like blades. Kale raised his arms, and the sound of the impact cracked through the air like thunder. Dust rose, leaves scattered, but when the smoke cleared, Kale was still standing. His thin arms were trembling, yes, but they had stopped the strike of the monster. The villagers' laughter died on their lips, replaced by silence, by fear. The beast roared again, louder this time, confused and enraged. Kale's body bent under the weight, his legs sinking into the soil, but his eyes stayed locked on the creature. He did not look weak, not anymore. His teeth clenched, his veins glowed faintly with the strange fire that had entered him in the ruins. The boy who could not lift a stone was now holding back a beast that could crush a house. Gasps spread through the crowd. Some whispered prayers, others backed away in fear. "Is this magic?" someone muttered. "No, it cannot be him," said another, his voice shaking. But the truth was undeniable. The boy they mocked was no longer what he seemed. Kale pushed, every muscle in his body screaming. For a moment, it felt as if the earth itself was pushing with him, a force rising through his feet into his arms. The beast staggered back, just a step, but enough to shake the villagers to their core. Their weak boy, their burden, had forced a monster to retreat. Fear spread among them, not of the beast, but of Kale. The same mouths that once called him useless now whispered with unease. What is he? Did he make a pact with darkness? He is not natural. But Kale heard none of them. his eyes never leaving the beast, his heart hammering with fire and defiance. The monster circled him, growling low, its claws carving scars into the ground. It was no longer charging blindly. It was testing him, weighing him, as if the creature itself understood that Kale was not prey, but something else entirely. The villagers watched in stunned silence, every heartbeat louder than the last. Kale remembered their laughter, the stones thrown at his back, the cruel games. He remembered their words, "You will always be weak." And now, standing before them all, he felt no desire for revenge, only proof. Proof that he was more than they believed. Proof that weakness was never the end, only the beginning. The beast roared and lunged again, its massive body a blur of fur and claws. Kale planted his feet, his hands glowing faintly as he caught the strike. The ground cracked beneath him, dust rising like smoke. The crowd gasped, some screamed, but Kale stood firm. He shouted, not at the beast, not at the villagers, but at fate itself. "I am not weak," his voice echoed like thunder. The villagers stepped back, their eyes wide. The boy they once mocked, now, seemed like a stranger. No one dared laugh. No one dared speak. The sound of the monster's growl mixed with the sound of Kale's defiance. And for the first time in their lives, the people felt fear, not of the beast, but of the boy who stood against it. The battle was far from over. The beast's strength was greater than any human, and Kale's power was only just awakening. His arms burned, his breath came heavy, his vision blurred, but his spirit was unbroken, his will sharper than any blade. He knew he could not fail here, not in front of those who had always waited for him to fall. As the monster drew back for another strike, Kale lifted his head, sweat running down his face. He locked eyes with the beast and whispered, "Come." The glow in his arms spread faintly to his chest, his heartbeat booming like a war drum. The villagers held their breath, torn between terror and awe. They no longer saw the boy they had mocked. They saw the birth of something else, something dangerous, something powerful, something unknown. The beast leapt, Kale braced, and the clearing shook with the clash of two forces no one had ever believed possible. And in that moment, the village's cruel laughter was gone, replaced forever with fear. The forest was alive with chaos. The ground shook under the monster's steps. The air ripped apart with its roars. Villagers huddled at the edge of the trees, too afraid to run, too frozen to stay away. And there, in the middle of the clearing, stood Kale, small and scarred, his body trembling but his spirit unbroken. The beast lunged, its massive jaws snapping like steel traps. Kale ducked, rolling aside, the hot breath of the creature brushing his face. Claws raked the ground where he had stood, tearing deep scars into the earth. The crowd gasped, expecting to see him crushed, but Kale rose again, fists clenched, eyes burning. He was not running, not this time. The monster turned, its golden eyes blazing with fury. It charged again, its shadow swallowing Kale whole. And then, in a heartbeat, it struck, its claws coming down like hammers. Kale raised his arms, the glow in his veins flaring bright. The impact boomed across the clearing, shaking branches loose, birds fleeing in terror. But Kale did not fall. He held the claws in his hands, his thin arms trembling yet refusing to break. The villagers could not believe their eyes. The boy who could not lift a stone was holding the weight of a beast that could crush trees. Gasps turned into silence, silence into awe, awe into fear. Kale roared, his voice echoing with something not entirely human. The glow spread from his arms to his chest, pulsing like fire beneath his skin. Every vein lit like molten iron, every breath burning like a forge. His feet dug into the ground, cracks spreading outward as the earth itself seemed to push with him. The beast growled, trying to force him down, but Kale's grip tightened, his eyes locked with the golden blaze of the monster. "No more," he whispered, his voice low but sharp as steel. And then he pushed. The impossible happened. The monster's massive body lifted, slowly, trembling, its claws thrashing in the air. Kale's arms shook, his body strained, sweat pouring down his face. But he did not stop, he could not stop. With a cry that split the air, he heaved, and the beast rose above his head. The villagers screamed, not in fear of the monster, but in terror of the boy. The weak child they had mocked now stood with a creature twice his size held high in the air. The ground quaked, the trees shivered, and for a moment, even the beast itself looked stunned. Its roars turned into furious howls, its claws swiping at nothing. But Kale's arms held firm, fueled by the fire inside him. Every memory of mockery, every cruel laugh, every word of doubt became strength in that moment. The weight on his shoulders was more than flesh. It was years of shame. And with each heartbeat, Kale burned those years away. He was no longer the boy of weakness. He was something else, something the world had never seen. The crowd fell to their knees, some in prayer, some in fear. "What is he?" one whispered. "He cannot be human." Another trembled. Even the elders, men of pride and tradition, could not speak. Their eyes wide, their voices stolen, they watched as their weakest child became their strongest warrior. Kale's knees bent, his muscles straining, the fire within him blazing hotter and hotter. The beast thrashed, but he lifted it higher still. And then, with a roar that shook the heavens, Kale spun, slamming the monster into the ground. The earth cracked, dust and stone exploding upward. The forest fell silent, save for the ragged breath of the boy who had done the impossible. The beast lay stunned, growling weakly, its golden eyes dimmed with shock. Kale staggered, his body shaking, his arms heavy, but he did not collapse. He stood over the monster, chest heaving, eyes glowing faintly with the power still burning in him. For the first time, he saw fear, not in the villagers, but in the beast itself. The weak boy had become the nightmare of nightmares. And yet Kale felt no triumph, only a strange calm. This was not victory, not yet. This was only proof that his destiny had begun. The voice in his dreams had not lied. The fire was real. But deep inside, Kale knew this was only a spark, not the full flame. The villagers stared at him, their faces pale, their mouths silent. They would never laugh at him again. They could not. What they saw now was no boy, no weakling, no outcast. What they saw was the impossible. Kale's eyes turned to the forest beyond the clearing. Dark shapes stirred in the distance, shadows moving between the trees. The beast at his feet was not the only one. Others had woken, drawn to the fire now burning in him. This was not the end, it was only the beginning. He whispered to himself, voice steady though his body shook. "If I can lift a beast, I can lift a world." The words carried into the silence, heavy as stone, sharp as fire. And though fear filled the eyes around him, somewhere deep in that fear was awe. For they had seen the impossible, and nothing would ever be the same. The rise of power. The clearing was broken. Cracks ran across the soil. Trees leaned as if they had bent to watch. Dust hung in the air like smoke after battle. And at the center stood Kale, his chest rising and falling, his arms trembling, yet his spirit burning brighter than fire. The beast he had lifted lay on the ground, stunned, its golden eyes flickering like fading embers. It groaned, tried to rise, but every muscle in its body shook in defeat. The villagers stared in silence, unable to breathe, unable to look away. The boy they mocked had become something beyond their understanding. Kale's body felt heavy, his arms sore, his lungs burning. Yet inside, something new moved, something alive. The energy from the ruins pulsed in his veins, no longer faint sparks, but steady fire. It was not only strength, it was will, it was purpose. He could feel it shaping him, pushing him beyond the limits of flesh. The villagers whispered among themselves. "He is not Kale anymore," one muttered. "Is he cursed or chosen?" another asked. But none dared step closer. They feared him more than they feared the monster. because they saw in his eyes not weakness, not fear, but power, power that should not belong to a boy. Kale's gaze lifted to the sky, the night creeping fast over the mountains. The stars burned brighter than ever, as if they too watched him. In that silence, he remembered the voice from his dreams. "Do not fear your weakness," it had said. Now he understood. His weakness had been a shell, a mask hiding what he was truly meant to be, and that mask had shattered. The beast staggered to its feet, growling weakly, its golden eyes still fierce, but its body broken from the impossible weight of Kale's defiance. It lunged once more, slower this time, its strength fading. Kale stepped forward, not with fear, not with hesitation, but with calm. His hand shot out, glowing faintly, and he caught the beast's horn. The monster froze, as if bound by something greater than strength. Its roar broke into a whimper, its body trembling under the boy's grip. Gasps spread through the crowd. It was not brute force this time. It was command. The fire inside Kale had shifted, no longer only pushing his body, but reaching into the beast itself. For a moment, boy and monster were bound, not by claws and muscle, but by something older, something that came from the ruins, from the earth, from the fire of forgotten ages. Kale released the beast, and it collapsed, defeated, not dead but subdued. The villagers' fear deepened, their whispers sharper. If he can command monsters, what will he do to us? Is this the end of us, or the beginning of something greater? The elders lowered their heads, knowing the world had just changed, and the change had come from the boy they had once called useless. Kale turned to them, his eyes glowing faintly in the dark. He raised his voice, steady despite his pain. "I'm not weak, not anymore," he said. "You called me nothing. You said I would never stand among you. But strength is not only in the arms, it is in the spirit, and my spirit will not bow again." The villagers flinched, some bowing their heads, some averting their eyes. They had laughed at him. Now they could not even meet his gaze. What stood before them was no longer Kale the weak boy. What stood before them was Kale the unbroken, Kale the chosen, Kale the beginning of a legend. But deep in the forest, shadows stirred. The fire inside him had awakened more than just his own strength. It had called to others, hidden things that had slept for centuries. Golden eyes flashed between the trees, more than one, more than two. The first beast had been only a herald, a warning. Now, an army of monsters waited, watching, drawn to the power blazing in the boy's veins. Kale felt it, his chest tightening as the night thickened with their presence. He should have been afraid, but instead he smiled faintly. For the first time in his life, he did not feel small. For the first time, he did not feel alone. The ruins had given him power. The beast had given him purpose. Now the darkness gave him destiny. He lifted his arms, the faint glow spreading brighter. The fire inside him roared, answering the call of the night. The villagers fell silent, watching, their fear turning to awe, for they knew, even without words, that Kale was no longer theirs. He belonged to something greater, something the world itself had chosen. The boy they mocked had risen. The boy they feared had become a force. And the night that began with laughter now ended with silence. For in that clearing, under the eyes of stars and monsters, a legend was born, and the world would never be the same again. The new legend. The night was heavy with silence. The beast lay broken on the earth, its golden eyes dimmed, its roars turned into quiet groans. And Kale stood above it, his chest rising and falling, his arms still glowing faintly with the fire that now lived inside him. The villagers did not cheer. They did not rush forward in joy. Instead, they stood frozen, their eyes wide, their breath shallow. They had once mocked him, laughed at him, called him weak. Now they feared him, respected him, and wondered if he was even human anymore. Kale turned to face them, his shadow long in the torchlight. For years, their voices had crushed him. Their scorn had weighed on his spirit like chains. But tonight, those chains had shattered. He was no longer bound by their laughter. He had forged his own name, carved it into the earth with the strength of his hands. One of the elders stepped forward, his voice trembling. "You carry the fire of the old ones," he whispered. "You're not a boy anymore, Kale. You're something greater." The villagers bowed their heads, some in reverence, some in fear. But Kale did not seek their worship, nor their forgiveness. He had already walked beyond them. The wind shifted, carrying with it a sound from the deep forest. Not one roar, but many. Golden eyes flickered in the darkness, dozens of them, watching, waiting. The first beast had been only the beginning. Now an army stirred in the shadows, drawn to the light blazing inside Kale. The villagers trembled. "If one beast nearly destroyed us, what will happen when many come?" they cried. But Kale did not tremble. Instead, he stepped forward toward the darkness, his eyes glowing brighter. He felt the power pulsing in his veins, not enough to end them all yet, but enough to stand, enough to begin. The beaten beast at his feet tried to rise. Kale placed his hand upon its horn, his grip firm yet calm. The glow in his palm spread into the creature's body, and for a moment, its roars softened, its head bowed. The villagers gasped, realizing Kale was not only strong, he could bend the will of monsters. A boy who once failed to lift a stone now commanded creatures of nightmare. Kale lifted his head, his voice steady, carrying across the silent clearing. "This is not the end," he said. "Tonight you saw me rise, but the true war has not yet begun. These beasts are not here by chance. They have been waiting, and now, because of me, they awaken." The words hung in the air like fire. The villagers looked at him not with laughter, not with pity, but with awe. In their hearts, they knew a story had begun, a story greater than their village, greater than the mountains. The boy who had been their shame was now their shield, their sword, their legend. Kale turned back to the forest, the eyes watching him from the shadows. He felt no fear, only a strange calm. This was his path, this was his burden. Weakness had forged him, mockery had sharpened him, pain had built him. Now power had claimed him. He whispered to himself, his voice soft but unshaken. "I was nothing, and they laughed. Now I rise, and the world will remember my name." The villagers bowed low, their fear melting into reverence. They knew they had witnessed the birth of something their grandchildren would speak of. The story of the boy who lifted a beast above his head would be told for generations. And though Kale walked away into the darkness, his shadow stretching long behind him, they already called him by a new name, not Kale the Weak, but Kale the Chosen. The forest stirred, the night alive with growls, the promise of battles yet to come. The air was thick with destiny, heavy with fire, and as Kale stepped into the dark, the stars burned brighter above him, as if the sky itself bore witness, as if the heavens had written his name among their eternal flames. The legend of Kale had begun, and the world would never be the same.